difficult decisions that we've all been faced with recently, and no right or wrong decision for all of us. It's just a very individual decision that each of us is making based on our own camp families and what we're able to do or feel we can do at camp this summer. But we are very thrilled, those of us who have made the decision to operate some kind of program on site at camp this summer. We know that we're going to be having some unique challenges, both in changes of protocol, changes to our programs, and most importantly, how our kids are arriving at camp and the changes in their mental health potentially from the last 2 months of dealing with coronavirus in their lives. We could not be more pleased to have Bob guiding us through this, Bob Ditter, who, as you all, I think, know very well, professional, working independently, but also in collaboration with camps and supporting camps in so many ways for so many years. And I hear it in his voice when I checked in with him this morning that he wants nothing more than for all of us to be successful in the decisions that we've made. And he has put so much time, thought, and energy into helping us do that. And we are forever grateful and indebted to that, Bob. We're so happy to have you at our side through this process. So thank you for being here.
Well, thanks, Kat, and I'm delighted to be here, and I'm actually very impressed with how everybody has been so careful and thoughtful about the decisions you've made, and I'm kind of laughing because I've been talking to a lot of camp professionals around the country, all of whom have said they have worked in the last 2 months about as hard as they normally do in the summer, and camp hasn't even happened yet. So my hat off to everybody who is navigating a way to do this. And as Kat said, there's no right or wrong answer. Everybody has to do what's best for their particular, operation and, their actual sort of site on the ground. So I want to talk a little bit about what the purpose of focus of my presentation is to you today. And that is, now that you figured out how to manage the biology, I want to help you think about and think ahead about managing the relationship aspects of running camp, what we call the mental, emotional, social health mesh aspects that are going to show up in your campers and your staff. You're going to see, obviously, some impact both in your staff and your campers in terms of the impact that the virus has had, the presence of the virus, the threat of the virus, the lockdowns, the sheltering in place, and the effects of all of that. And I have to say, while it's difficult for anybody to predict, I don't think anybody can really, claim to predict exactly what kind of behavior you're going to see, with a lot of specificity this summer. We do know from a recent Kaiser Family Foundation poll that 45% of young people, and this is already back in April, had reported an increase in the level of their stress and anxiety since the pandemic. And some of that, we know, some of that stress and anxiety is going to be coming to camp. So I want to provide a framework to help you and also your staff understand better, like what they've been experiencing so that you can help them take full advantage of what you are going to do this summer, right? So let me just kind of outline, how I have organized this. And I want to say up front, I'm going to be mentioning some resources that I will make available through Maine summer camps so that all of you can have one of the exercises. You'll see there's a number, like 5 different resources that I want to make available to you, just to make sure that you are as successful as you possibly can be. So the first thing is, let's try to create a framework for understanding the impact of the virus, which I think we have one. And I also want to talk about the relevance of grief to your campers and staff, and I'll explain that when we get into it. I want to talk a little bit also about how do you get the staff that show up to be their best, right? How do you help them, perform their best, be present, be there for the kids as best as possible as you know, as much as humanly possible, given the current situation. And how can you prepare for campers, and then how can you work with some possible camper mental, emotional, social issues? Okay, so let's talk first about a framework, right? Let's start with this. Nothing about this is normal, right? There is no precedent for this. In modern history, there has never been a time when the entire world has been going through something that affects everybody, right? And being inside for your kids, for your campers, and frankly, even for your staff, being inside and away from their friends and loved ones is just not normal, right? Wearing a mask outside, right? Remembering to take your mask, right? And wait till the weather gets hot, right? Wearing a mask outside is just not normal. As kids say to me, it's kind of weird, Mr. Ditter, right? Being afraid to be near other people. Most of us, our tendency is to walk toward people, and we've been sort of coached to walk away from people, and that's just not normal, right? Not being in school. And one of the big issues for kids is touch, right? Boys fist bumping each other, or giving each other a hand up when they're climbing a tree, or touching each other, slapping each other in the back, kids hugging each other, girls sharing things, holding hands. Touch has suddenly become not okay, and that is just so counterintuitive, especially for kids, and I think especially for campers and staff. And it's going to have, and it has had, a real impact, I think, on kids' mental health, right? You will have some kids or some staff members who have lost a loved one, right? They've lost a grandparent, they've lost an aunt or an uncle, or they know someone who's lost somebody. So the degree of separation is getting closer and closer, and that also has an impact on our mental health, right? You've got some staff and kids who have lost their sports season, never got to play, had been training all year, and then they don't get to have it. They don't have their senior year in high school. They won't have their senior year in college. They won't graduate, right? They've lost their internship. They've lost their community. They're not sure, maybe your staff, what their careers are going to be, what graduating from college and looking for a job looks like now. So it has increased a lot of uncertainty, meaning we've had that certainty taken away from us. And of course, being cooped up inside with your family. If you are an adolescent, the last thing you want to do is be cooped up with your family. And you've got parents working at home, if they're lucky enough to have that work. And some of them may even be facing, the loss of their job, the loss of the business, and that also has an impact on your staff, if that's who their parents are, or your kids. So the only thing that is normal about this is how we feel about it. And I think that's important to say to both your campers and staff, that, everything that's happening to us is just not normal. And why wouldn't we have certain reactions to all of this abnormality, all right? So what I think we're experiencing, in a kind of a framework that I'd like you to be thinking about, is universal loss, right? Everybody who's going through this is going to have lost something or will lose something as a result of this pandemic, right? Each person's loss is going to be different. It's not going to be equal in degree. It's not going to be equal in how serious it is. However, it's going to be universal, even if it's subtle, right? And that's going to have an impact on kids and staff as well, right? Some people, like I say, will have lost a loved one. Some people will have lost a business or a job, or even a livelihood, right? Or there's the threat of that loss. They've lost their friends, the community, graduation, senior year, internship, all of that, right? And when I talk about graduation, by the way, whether it's high school graduation or college graduation, I want you to understand what that is for a young person, right? It is the opportunity not just to celebrate the culmination of, say, their high school career or their college career and the end of a chapter of their life. It is also an opportunity for them to experience the pride of their parents and of their relatives, right? And that's huge, and that's a loss that kids aren't going to get that back, at least not in the near future, right? There's also been a loss of innocence, right? Kids and your staff wake up every day to, I hate to say it, body counts, like, how many people are infected, how many people have died. We just crossed the 100,000 mark in terms of the number of people in the United States who've died. So even if it's not close to your immediate family, there is this loss of innocence, that this unkind reminder of this existential threat. Okay, it's an unkind reminder of our mortality, right? And kids don't usually have to think about that. And of course, there's been a loss of our communities, our schools, our neighborhoods, which of course is exactly why camp is so important and valuable to people right now, right? So with universal loss, there is also universal grief, meaning that all of your staff and your campers are going to have some kind of a grief reaction, or they've been having a grief reaction to various degrees, right? Not everybody's going to have the same reaction. Nobody's going to have it in the same order. Not everybody's going to have it to the same degree, and everybody will have it, right? That each person's specific reaction, grief reaction, is going to be different. They're going to bring that to camp, especially your staff. And even though the grief will be universal, everybody will have lost something, right? It's going to be subtle for kids, right? Kids won't know even how to put that into words, right? So the first stage of grief is shock, disbelief, denial. We see it actually playing out in the United States, right? I even wake up every morning and say, wait, is this really happening? Like, am I in a dream? Like, when does the nightmare end, right? And so you go from that, which I think all of us have that cross our mind, like, how could this possibly be happening? To, oh, it's no big deal. You hear a lot of people say it's not a big deal. I don't understand. It's been overblown. And then you even see on the other end of the extreme spectrum, you hear people saying it's a hoax. This has been contrived by, some pharmaceutical company, whatever. So shock, disbelief, denial are all part of one of the first responses or reactions to grief, right? There's also anger, and you're going to see this especially in your kids, right? Agitation, frustration, restlessness, irritability. They've been cooped up. They're angry, and I'll get into this more when we talk specifically about campers, but there's also this kind of anger, even if it's not, verbalized. Why aren't the adults fixing this? Like, why do we have to stay in the house? Why did we lose our friends? Why did we lose school? As much as I hate it, I love school, right? I mean, kids don't really admit they love school, but we all know school is 80% social, right? There's also bargaining and deal making. You're going to see this show up at camp. You're going to have kids, you're going to have certain protocols and, certain changes in your procedures in order to make it safe for everybody. And at some point, both your campers and staff are going to get exhausted and tired of it. They're going to be like, why can't we just do what we normally do, right? Why can't we just, oh, where's my mask, right? So whatever your particular protocols are, we all know kids, they're going to forget, right? They're going to kind of resist. They're going to push back. They're going to feel like, why is this being imposed? That's kind of a combination of being angry about having limits put on us and some deal making and bargaining, right? There's also going to be sadness, right? I think that you will have staff who will show up who will be sad, sad that they lost their campus, their college community suddenly, that they didn't get to say goodbye to their friends in the way they would like to have for the summer. Maybe they've lost an internship. Maybe again, they didn't get to graduate, right? And campers have had losses as well, right? And that sadness, I want to go back to this, and I know I've talked about this before, but sadness is different than depression. Sadness is a richness. You have to have something to have been sad about in the first place. And so if you've lost a grandparent, you're sad because you had something special with your grandparent that's now gone forever, right? If you had a community, if you had an opportunity that's now gone, you have to grieve that, right? And so there's going to need to be this balance at camp, especially with staff, which I'll talk about, which is how do you get them to buy into the vision, the excitement, the opportunity, and make room. Notice I said and, not but, and make room, right, for the sadness, the grief, whatever that grief reaction might be, right? And left unattended, depression really develops, meaning like if there's no opportunity to share your grief, to work through your grief, to express your feelings of grief, whether it's anger, disbelief, shock, even fear, which I'll get to later, then it develops into depression because you get sort of paralyzed, right? And what all of that leads to, the whole I think, idea, if you will, or the whole purpose of the process of grief in human beings, which by the way is innate in us, right, is to get to acceptance. How do we move forward? So for your staff and your campers, it's, yes, you're right, right? Camp isn't going to be exactly the same as it always is. Let's note that and grieve that and honor that. And let's then take the opportunity that we have. That's going to be your overall sort of theme and message, right? So we know we've got to start with staff, right? Your staff are your biggest kids, right? They are also your greatest resource. And that's why I hope that you've got a core group of staff that you have a history with, that love your camp, that carry the spirit and the tradition, and that are ready to be in it with you together, okay? And because it's your staff that's going to connect with the kids, encourage the kids, comfort the kids, guide the kids, right? So it's your staff that puts your program, whatever that program is that you're going to have, they've got to have buy-in, right? They've got to be, once the kids show up, they've got to be 100% ready with it. Like, yes, we're at acceptance. We're ready. We know it may not be the same. We know it's going to be different. We know there's going to be some loss. But we ourselves as staff have to be in a state of acceptance. We have to accept the opportunity that we have, okay? It's hard to be at camp, right, as a staff person if your mind is somewhere else, right? So if you come to camp and you just broke up with, you know, a significant other, or you're grieving the loss of graduation, or your internship just fell through, there has to be some opportunity for you to face that, note it, and then grieve it, to let go, right? Because you can't say hello, meaning embrace the campers, until you say goodbye, right? And that's a theme in this. You can't say hello, you can't embrace what there is if you're being held back by something that you need to let go of, right? And there are three things that your staff will immediately have in common when they come to camp, regardless of their previous experience at your camp. And this is something that I want you to share with them as well. And by the way, I'm going to be cutting a staff version of this slideshow, so that if any of you want to show it to your staff as a resource during the time that you are going to be doing training with them, I want to make that available to you. So there are three things that your staff are immediately going to have in common. One is, we're all in a time for which we have no precedent. We're all in this together, right? We have no precedent for this. We're all going through it together, right? We have all experienced some kind of loss. Maybe it's different, maybe it's not to the same degree, but since this pandemic has appeared, it's changed all of our lives in some way. And the third thing is, we all have this extraordinary opportunity that's been given to us to be together and give something to the kids, right? That's what, and you, during your training, have to highlight that and, you know, sort of note that, right? Mark that for your staff, because that's what you want them to join around. All three of those things. We're in this time together, right? We have all had some kind of change, disruption, loss in our life that we didn't ask for, that is no fault of ours. And, you know, we have this huge, wonderful, terrific opportunity that we all want to, you know, gather around, right? So there are certain particular aspects of your staff training, and I'm sure you've all thought about this already, but I just wanted to go over this, right? You need to give your returning staff a chance to reunite, reconnect, and bond, right? If you have, and I'm not sure how all of you are configuring your staff this summer. If some of you have people who are new to your camp, that's going to be, there's going to be a big need to really bring them on board, right? What I would do if I were you is to bring back your returning staff first, let them get reconnected, and then help them make it really clear about how they're going to personally invite anybody who's new on the staff into the fold, okay? So, because I think that you're going to need a real team, right? You're going to have changes in protocol. You're going to have kids who are going to have different kinds of reactions, and you need to have your staff 100% with you, right? So making sure you've got your staff together, I would enhance the icebreakers, the bonding exercises, the work projects. I think, boys connect through action, young men, staff connect through doing stuff together. I think, we all share in different ways, but I think you've got to extend the amount of time that you spend on connecting, on helping your staff reminisce if they've come in early and they're returning. Anything that helps to promote a connection among them, all right? And initially, most of your staff are going to experience relief just being there. They're going to be, oh, I mean, I know staff members who started calling camp directors in March when they found out they were going home, like, can't I just come to camp now, right? Because in the face of uncertainty, of loss, people want to go to a place that's safe and familiar. And camp is that safe place for a lot of your staff. And so initially, most of your staff are going to just experience relief and exhilaration just being there. Isn't it great that we're together, that we can do this? It's very special that we get to do this. And that's great. And I want to point out to you, that's the polite stage. Okay, don't be fooled. That's not gonna, you've got to do a little work and massaging with that, because that's an initial reaction. You've got an entire, 3, 4, 5 weeks, whatever your program's gonna be, to get through. And that initial relief and exhilaration isn't gonna last unless you do a little work around it. So that's what we call the polite stage. They're forming, okay? And so, I think you also have to have, obviously, weekly, not weekly, you have to have meetings that directly address the COVID-19 moment. And by that, I don't mean the changes in the protocols that you're going to have. Obviously, you've got to do that. I'm going to leave all of that technical stuff to you, like what your protocols are, what are the rules around sanitation, around touch, around staff, how you're interacting with the kids, all of those things. But I think you also have to talk a little bit, like I'm talking now, about what the situation is like, what kids have been experiencing, what they've been experiencing. That's what I call the COVID-19 moment, meaning what is the experience we've been having with this that we all have in common. I would show them this slideshow, and like I said, I'm going to be creating a version of this that is going to be specifically for your staff, as if I'm talking to your staff as opposed to you. I should have that available with some other resources by Monday, and we'll put it out through Maine summer camps. And you're also going to want to create as safe as an environment as possible for some deeper sharing. And this is what I'm moving toward. So, to be fully present, right? To be more sensitive to the mental, emotional, social needs of the campers, you're going to have to do a little bit deeper work than you might normally do with your staff. This is an unusual, unprecedented moment, and it requires some unusual and unprecedented steps. All right. So on maybe day 3, let's assume that you're having at least a 10-day, maybe even a 2-week quarantine period with your staff. But on day 3, after your staff has had a chance to connect, they've had a chance to, if there are new people, to bring them into a fold, to get settled, to be in it together, to get reacquainted with the physical place of camp, to even sing some camp songs, to get into some of the camp traditions, to feel the way the dining hall works, to get used to some of the protocols that are going to change. After they've had a chance to experience those things and to work with those things, I want you to do something, do an exercise with them that really gets to some of the emotions that we call sticky. What sticky means is that emotions that linger, that stay with you, even if they're not immediately on the surface. And what I'm talking about here is, if you want your staff to embrace the current opportunity that you're giving them, and you're going to have to acknowledge the impacts of COVID-19, right? This is what we mean by connect before you redirect. You want it to connect in a deeper way, and you want to do that for a couple of reasons, right? Because where we want to end up is acceptance, meaning to take full advantage of the great opportunity that they have to be together and to be at camp, right? So if you ignore the reality of the loss and grief that they may have experienced, whatever that is for them personally, it's going to go underground, and it's going to surface when you least want it to, right? And the other point of this is that sort of this exercise and allowing staff to share in a deeper way is going to allow them to be more sensitive to the kids, because the kids are going to have to do the same thing at some point, right? So after explaining the sharing exercise to the full staff, I want you to get them into groups of 5 or 6, small, right? The reason for that is I want it to be more personable. I want them to talk personally with each other. I don't want it to feel like a class exercise. I want it to feel like a personal sharing. Make sure that the groups are mixed evenly. So if you have some older campers who graduated last summer and their first time counselors on staff this time, you want to mix them in with your returning staff. And if you have some new staff, make sure they're evenly mixed. I don't want, all the friends together. You've got to kind of figure out how to mix people up. And then you establish the ground rules, right? Everyone shares as they are comfortable. You can pass when it's your turn to share within your small group. When one person is speaking, others will listen. That means no side conversations, no crosstalk. You want to honor the person who's got the stage. We pass the talking stick, and everyone will respect what others share. Okay, and so you're going to pass out a paper that I'm going to provide for you, and it's going to be a Word doc, so you can adjust it, add to it, edit it, make it yours any way you want to. But on that piece of paper, there are going to be actually 2 different things, front and back. What you're going to do is you're going to have everybody get into those small groups. Everybody gets the paper, and in the privacy of their own thoughts, quietly to themselves, writing. As a result, you're going to ask them the first question. As a result of the pandemic, what sudden changes happened in your life? Okay. Some examples might be you had to leave school suddenly. You had to have some online classes to finish. You didn't have the sports season. You didn't get to play lacrosse or summer soccer or, summer soccer or spring soccer, spring track. You had to cancel a trip. You had an internship that was canceled. Whatever that sudden change was, what was that for you? Okay. The second question is, as a result of the pandemic, what losses have you experienced? Now, you can't get this wrong. So if some of your staff feel that this question is the same as the first one, it doesn't matter, right? The whole point is to open up the opportunity and the space for your staff to share in this deeper way, right? Some examples might be, do they know someone who's died from the COVID-19 disease? Do they have a parent whose job is threatened or lost their job or their business is threatened? Do they know someone who's had a serious bout with the disease, but they recovered? Was it a scare? Did they have to leave school suddenly? Did they have to have, like I said, online classes? They didn't get to graduate. All of these things. In other words, what loss did they actually have? And then the third thing is looking at the grief chart, which is another resource that I will supply for you. Write down the feelings that you've experienced as a result of either these losses or these changes, right? And be as, full as you can about what those are. Like, have you had some anger about it? Have you had some sadness? Have you been frustrated? Has there been some relief, right? Have you felt gratitude from time to time, right? Have you had some fear? Have you been agitated? Have you been impatient with the whole process? Maybe you felt anxious. Maybe you felt even anxious about coming to camp, even though you've been excited about coming to camp. Have you had some hope, right? And if you can, tie those feelings to specific experiences. And then what you're going to do is within their small groups, once everybody's had time in the privacy of their own thoughts, maybe it's 10 minutes, maybe it's 15 minutes, take your time with this. Don't rush this. You're going to have some time. You want to create the space and the breathing room for some of this emotion to come in. Because if you don't allow it to come in, like I said, it's going to go underground and work against your staff being fully present as possible, right? So you want then for them to take turns within their small group and share each question. Take one question at a time. What was a sudden change? How did I feel about those changes, right? Everybody gets to share, right? And after each person is finished sharing, others, before you go on to the second question, validate, like, I heard what you said. That was hard for me too. I felt the same way, right? Tell me more about that, right? And I'll have some of these prompts, by the way, um, on the exercise for you. Then you go to the next question, and everybody who wants to share gets to, right? And once the first question has been shared, you go to the second question, right? Now, some notes about this. Number one, it's helpful to actually, if you can, take your leadership team or your senior staff people and have one embedded in each of the groups if you can. Doesn't, you know, if you've got some fairly competent senior staff members in some of the groups, that's fine. The idea is for you to participate in this as well, because we're all in this together, right? And the second part is, right, that's going to be your theme. We're all in this together, right? The kind of sharing you're going to be asking them to do is actually going to be easier, because everybody's got this in common, right? If you were asking them to share, you know, some deep, dark secret about their childhood, that would be much more difficult, frankly, much less appropriate, because that's different for everybody. But what everybody has in common is we've never been in a situation like this before. We've all had some kind of loss or change or disruption in our life, and we are all here in this together with this great opportunity, right? And the bonding that happens as a result of people sharing is going to go more quickly. They're going to open up to each other. They're going to trust each other precisely because they have those three things in common that I talked about, okay? Believe me, I have been through this kind of exercise with staff many, many times. And I know some of you may not be used to, you know, facilitating something like this. I think you're basically providing the opportunity. They're going to provide the energy and the you know, the sharing, which I think is going to bring you a lot of results, right? Now, there may be some specific feelings that come up that I want you to be aware of. One of them is some of your staff members are going to feel guilty that their situation is not as dire or not as bad as some other people. And my suggestion, it may come up, right? I feel so bad, like I have it pretty good. My parents can ride this out. You know, I'm not in my senior year. Again, I might get to have it next year, right? I got to actually see some of my friends. That, you know, instead of feeling guilty, I would encourage people to feel grateful, right? People feeling guilty about something doesn't do anybody any good. And so rather than feel guilty, have them step into gratitude instead, right? Rather than feel guilty about, you know, the fact that your situation isn't as bad, feel gratitude that you have what you have, okay? That's part of what you want to bring into this mix. The other thing that may show up in this, and you can see that we're doing a dress rehearsal here for the kids, right? Some of your staff members may feel somewhat judgmental of others, like, you know, or not be as patient with their experiences or their feelings. And what I would encourage you to have as a theme and as a message is to replace judgment with curiosity. So tell me more about why you felt that way, or tell me more about why that happened to you, or tell me more about why you didn't do this, right? As opposed to judging, right? And because judgment is all about shaming people. It's all about blame and shame, right? So I think that's really important. Sharing on this level does four things. Number one, it helps counselors let go, right? It allows them to actually grieve. That's what you're going to be doing. And by the way, be ready for tears, right? That's real. You want your camp experience to be real, and that's real, and it's not something you created, and it's all there and everybody has it. So you're allowing that space for the staff to share that, right? And so doing that allows them to let go, to grieve, and to be more fully present. The second thing is it develops greater and deeper trust among your staff, right? And the third thing is it's a kind of dress rehearsal for the campers who may have similar, you know, losses or feelings, right? Now, I'm not suggesting, by the way, we do this with staff, with kids. That's a whole nother thing, and I'm not going there, right? You'll see where I'm going with kids. I don't want you to have your staff do the same exercise with campers. I want to treat campers very differently, but it does sensitize your staff and give them language that they can use when kids express any kind of grief reaction, which I'll get into in a minute. It also helps to set you up to talk about the opportunity, right, that you have, which is to build and be nurtured by friendships, right, to be in a community that supports you, to be in the company. You're going to give kids the chance to be in the company of interesting, caring adults, which they are hungering for right now. to get lost in the flow of camp. And I want to talk a little bit more about that when we get to campers. And to look back at the end of the day, for kids to look back, for campers to look back at the end of the day and said, we did it, you know, I did this myself, I had this myself, I did it, right? Now, that's the buy-in, that's the acceptance. And you want to start with that vision. You also want to give people an opportunity to do the sharing I talked about and then come back to that vision, all right? So the opportunity and the relief of being together and having camp for campers is going to be exhilarating as well, right? So you don't want to undermine that exhilaration by not allowing a place for your staff to have this sadness, this loss, this grief, and to talk about their anxiety, talk about the worries, because it also allows your staff to support each other. What does support look like? It looks like somebody verbally saying, I hear you. Wow, that must be tough, you know, validating people's feelings, validating people's situations, right? Validating their positive intentions, right? Validation is huge for your staff to develop that kind of support, right? And one, that is having room and opportunity for the sadness and the expression of this grief doesn't negate buying into this great opportunity, right? In fact, it's quite the reverse, right? Allowing more complete expression of what's authentic, what's real for your staff is going to help them be more authentic with the kids and help them perform better. So what about the campers, all right? So one of the things that's really important, and I'm sure many of you have thought about this already, is it's going to be critical for you to get certain kinds of additional information ahead of time about your campers so that your staff are prepared, right? You are all very good at doing the medical forms and what medications do you take, and you're all good at, you know, behavioral forms, you know, what kind, you know, what are how does your kid handle transitions? How easily do your kids make friends? All of that stuff. That's great. And in addition to that, you're going to need a camper information sheet that is really specific to COVID-19, okay? Because you need to know what your campers are walking into camp with, right? So the specific questions are, and again, I'm going to provide this sheet for you as a resource, and you can change it any way you want to because it'll be a Word doc. It's going to be yours. Like my thing is, yes, I wrote it, but it's yours to use. So please use it, right? And change it in any way that makes it more usable or better for you. So the first question is, what losses or significant changes has your child experienced during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? So you may, I mean, we all know kids haven't had school. That's easy. We all know the kids have been away from their friends. Did they have a grandparent who died? Did a dog die during this, right? Not that it would have died of COVID-19, but was there some kind of loss? And which is compounded, by the way, by the fact that there's certain kinds of mourning or grieving that can't happen during the COVID period, right? So if you had a grandfather who died in, you know, a different state or even across town, there's not going to be some big get together about it. It's not going to happen. It didn't happen. You know, do you have a camper whose parent lost their job? Do you have a camper who, you know, had some other significant loss? You want to know about that, not because you're going to bring it up, right? You want campers to come in and get away from that and have some release. However, you want some release and some relief, both. But you also want to be prepared. You need to know this so that if something comes up, your counselors aren't flying in the dark, right? How has your child handled being out of school? Have they been restless? Have they been irritated? Have they been fighting? Have they handled it fairly well? Why? Because we know that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So if kids have been irritable, cranky, anxious, that may show up at camp. We need to know so that we can comfort kids. We can tell them, look, we're here for you. Like, we can be more proactive, right? And that's what you want to say to your parents. The reason we're asking for this is to prepare us as best as possible. Not that we're going to bring it up, right? We're not going to start with this. We're going to be there ready with it in case kids begin to evidence certain kinds of behaviors. And what has your child's reaction been to coming to camp? So I've been talking to a lot of kids in my private practice. It is exciting, and other kids are like, I'm not going. Like, are you kidding me? I might get sick. And other kids are like, it's not going to be the same. So if you have kids who are coming, you want to know, what has their reaction been? What's their anxiety about camp? Some of them, one of the biggest things is camp going to be the same? That's something you're going to have to address up front. The answer is, Yes and no. No camp's not going to be exactly the same. Be upfront about it with your kids, right? Don't keep them guessing, right? We all know that camp is going to be a little different, right? Do that right on opening day after they've had a chance to settle in and they've had a chance to get to know their counselors and they've had a chance to bond. You want to end with an all camp, physically distanced, however appropriately you want to do it, but you want to pull them together so that you can say, yes, camp is going to be different and it's still going to be great, right? We have to acknowledge reality, okay? And I think knowing how kids felt before they come is going to just arm you, equip you much better. And obviously the fourth question is there anything else that you think we should know that would help us be prepared in case it came up? Again, you're not going to lead with these things with kids. You want kids to come to you with it. You want to be able to respond if it does come up, all right? So what's hard is to predict exactly what kind of different kinds of behaviors you're likely to see in your kids after, but we do know some things, right? And one of the things we know is most of them, almost all of them, have been cooped up and under basically house arrest for what will have been the past 3.5 months. That's going to have had a huge impact on their mental, emotional, and social health, right? They've been cooped up inside. What does that mean? Low physical and tactile stimulation. We know that kids' brains actually grow from gross motor and tactile activity, meaning touch, right? Your brain grows when you swim, when you touch your friends, when you bump fist your friends, when you high five your friends, when you hug, right? When you run, when you're playing, when you're like laughing and playing, right? That kids have been acutely understimulated, and that's going to result in different reactions in different kids, and I'll get to that in a minute. Second thing is that lack of in-person contact. Again, low stimulation, right? Starving for socialization. We have kids, by the way, who have some Asperger or autistic like features. We used to call them Asperger's kids, who, are in their own worlds and are perfectly happy right now being indoors. However, they're suffering too, because what kids with autistic features don't understand is that they need that person-to-person stimulation. They just don't think they need it. They're in their own world. And if they don't get it, right, they too are going to be stunted as a result of that. They're not going to be as curious. They're going to get depressed. They're not going to feel as vibrant, right? So all of your kids have missed that in-person, close contact. I have had kids who have talked to me in my private practice. Being cooped up is like bored. One day is like the next, right? There's nothing to look forward to. Everything is the same, right? Online school seems pointless. Why are we doing it? It's so stupid, right? Kids don't even know what day of the week it is, right? They've lost their routines, which, by the way, is why camp routines are going to be so good for them. It's like a structure, right? It's like, oh, we wake up at a certain time. We clean up at a certain time. We eat at a certain time. There's going to be anxiety. There's been anxiety like, will my family get it? Will someone in my family get it? Is it safe to be with other people, right? So kids' anxiety levels have been bumped up incredibly because their parents are also anxious, right? Is the economy going to rebound? Like, are we all going to be okay from this? Are we going to find a vaccine? And there's a lot of anger on the part of kids. Masks are stupid. They're weird. And I want you to think about a mask. A mask is basically a nonverbal message to kids that says, I'm putting this on to protect myself from you, and you're putting it on to protect yourself from me. That's not the message we want to give kids. So we have to be upfront about, how stupid, and agree with kids. Yeah, masks are weird, and I still love you, and I'm still with you, and I still care about you, and we can still do stuff together. And there'll be times when we can take our mask off, right? And there's also anger on the part of kids, which I don't think they fully have formed yet. And you may see it once kids get to camp, which is, this whole thing is dumb. Why don't the adults fix this, right? So with campers, we want to do opposite of what you do with the staff. With the staff, you're going to make a specific time, create a specific for caring that I talked about. Kids process things differently, right? Staff can seal over their sadness, their loss, their grief, and keep it intact. Kids do, in fact, get caught up in the moment. So you've seen a homesick kid who, once they get involved in stuff, they're not homesick anymore. But you've also seen that homesick kid go right back to being homesick when they're not like, in an activity, when they're not in some sort of flow experience. And the reason for that is kids don't have the kind of ceiling over staying power that staff has, which is why I do not recommend that you sit all your kids down in small groups and say, go through the kind of exercise that we went through. I want you differently to, let situations arise as they do, having that good background information, since one size won't fit all. Not different kids are going to have different reactions, right? There's going to be some initial relief on a part of all of the kids, exhilaration at being together, at being at camp, being away, thank goodness, from their parents, right? Their parents are going to be exhilarated too. But there's also going to be the possibility of some overstimulated behavior because they have been cooped up. What does that mean? Too silly, too physically aggressive, right? Too rambunctious, challenging the staff. That's partly their anger reaction, but it's also they're overstimulated because they have been cooped up for so long. You're going to see this sort of over release, and then it'll settle back, right? So it's like you have pent up demand for movement, for connection, for touch, for yelling and laughing and shouting and all of the other kinds of release expressions that kids have. And it's going to be a pent up demand. So you're going to see that it's going to feel for a lot of kids, it's going to feel a little overstimulated, right? And your staff has to be ready for that, to be able to name it, to be able to contain it, to be able to, make sense of it, to normalize it. I'll get to that in a second. There's also going to be some anxiety. You're going to have kids who are anxious to begin with. And there's going to be a lot of anxiety about, is it safe to be here? Will we be okay? Will this be like real camp? It won't be like real camp. And there's going to be some anger. Like, why do we have to wear masks? This is stupid. Why can't we just do it the way we always do it? It's okay. Nobody's going to get, that sort of thing. So again, I want you to frame it for your staff in terms of the grief model, right? All of your campers have experienced some various degrees of grief, even if they don't know it and haven't named it as such, okay? They haven't thought of it as grief. Like, well, I haven't lost anything. Well, of course you've lost something, right? You've lost your community, your friends, you've lost school. And those grief reactions will differ, right? And the kids may not even have words for it, right? They're going to be, some of them still in some shock and disbelief, right? And that's at home. So on what you see on your screen, I think it's on your left side, shock, disbelief, denial, numbness that they felt at home. They've been in a state of numbness or a state of shock or a state of disbelief, suspended animation. They get to camp, there's going to be this initial relief and exuberance. There's going to be some pent-up anger, some frustration, agitation, right? You've got some kids who are ADHD and are used to having to sort of vent or, get let off steam, and they haven't been able to do that. So you're going to see some overstimulated behavior. Again, too silly, too aggressive, maybe a little too curious, right? Maybe a little provocative. Those are typical overstimulated types of behaviors. You're going to see bargaining and deal making. Like, do we really have to wear these masks? Why can't we just do this, right? So I want your staff to anticipate that's all part of the normal unfolding of their grief, right? Sadness for what they've lost, including, by the way, their innocence. I don't think kids can even verbalize that. Like, I don't want to be reminded about dying, right? I don't want to know that, Aunt Gracie might die from this if she gets it, right? And there may even be some depression and some isolation, although I suspect at camp, the kids, there's a sort of, I think the kids who probably are going to be coming are going to be, you're going to see more of that initial relief and exuberance, even if there's some hesitation at first, right? There's also going to be some fear, right? Like, what about my family? Are they going to be okay? Are we all going to be okay? Will they be okay here at camp? Is it okay to touch this? Is it okay to be in this group? So you're going to see some fear. And again, your staff is going to have to be reassuring when they see kids in that. And there may even be some guilt, right? You may have some kids who are like, well, why do I get this great opportunity and some of my siblings don't get to go, or my friends aren't going, right? Or like, is it okay for me to have fun while my parents are at home working, or other kids don't have the same kind of fun? And again, you want your staff to be ready for that, because you want them to be able to talk about, feeling grateful instead of feeling guilty. It's important for you to be grateful and be glad for what you have, because what you have isn't hurting someone else, right? And that's what I think kids get into. It's sort of like, if I'm happy, that must mean that I'm making other kids unhappy. Nope, doesn't work that way, but kids think that way. So I want to give you an overall prescription, okay? Your campers are all going to benefit from just the activity, the gross motor activity. It's total antidepressant for those kids, right? The routines of camp, right? That things happen in a certain order every day, and you can count on it, and it makes each day distinct. It makes each part of the day distinct, right? And I'm gonna tell you, I think your kids are gonna be like, oh, great, cleanup, right? I think it's gonna be like, just the change is gonna be stimulating to them. You can almost not get this wrong, right? You need to have a good balance of the following. You need to have time for your kids to connect. Both you need to have some cabin downtime, like build that in. I'm rest hour, obviously, but other times, which I'll talk about in a minute. And also sometimes in a somewhat larger, even if it's physically distanced events, meaning I think kids are going to need to feel like they're part of the overall camp. Like somehow you arrange that so they have that sense of belonging to something greater than just their little cabin unit, right? You also want to have your counselors get your kids into flow experiences. Here's what I mean by flow experience. This is critical. Flow experience is what heals kids. Flow experience is what heals kids. Flow is when you are so engrossed in an activity, you forget about time, right? You are playing or engaged with abandon. It can be, a card game. It can be a conversation around a campfire. It can be, an exciting game of, capture the flag or soccer or basketball, or it could be swimming. It could be, going up on the ropes course and you're so scared but that's flow. You're in it. You're so focused and in the moment. It means super presence, okay? That's what you need to have your counselors create for kids. It can be during rest hour, it could be during, whatever, but that the more the kids are actually in flow, right? The best sessions I have with kids are when we are talking or playing and suddenly we're both surprised that it's the end of the hour, right? Wait a minute, how could that time have gone by so quickly? That's healing, okay? And sing, even if you're not used to singing, figure out ways to sing popular songs, right? Sing, whatever cleaned up rap songs, whatever your kids will go into. Singing is also healing because it is also a little bit about abandon, but it's also about connection. We know from just scientific evidence that singing actually helps kids feel connected and reduces their sense of aggression, okay? Encourage your campers to support one another. If they're feeling sad, they're cranky, like tie it right back to, we've all been going through this together. Lots of people are cranky. Like, no wonder you're cranky, right? Have time for reflection at the end of the day in your smaller camper groups. What are you reflecting on? What was a highlight of the day? What was your best part of the day? What's something new you've done? Now, many of you may already do this. So make sure that and if you don't do it, please start doing it. Like, kids need the time for reflection. And nighttime is a great time after bed and everybody's so settled into their bunk or their bed, and they've got their flashlight so they're able to talk. It's a great natural reflection time for kids. What was the highlight of the day? Did you make a new friend? Did you do something new you've never done? Is there something you want to do tomorrow? Right? What do you want to make sure you do before you leave camp? That sort of thing, right? Now, a couple of other specific messages for your staff with the kids. Try to name the feelings. Connect before you redirect. What that means is connect, talk, acknowledge a feeling, right? I can see you're really upset. What's going on, right? Try to name the feeling that you see a camper experiencing, okay? Second thing, normalize feelings, right? I wouldn't be surprised if you were feeling angry. We're all kind of angry, right? Look at what's going on. You haven't been in school for 2-3 months, right? You haven't been with your friends. Of course you're mad, right? Of course you're irritated, right? So normalize feelings. Third thing, reframe, right? You have really a rare opportunity because we are all in this together. Chances are good that you can tie whatever a kid is experiencing or, manifesting in their behavior to the pandemic in some way. It's like nothing about this has been normal, right? It's been tough on all of us. I wouldn't be surprised if you're a little upset, right? I can see that you're anxious. We're all a little anxious, right? Name it to tame it. This is a critical thing, encouraging kids to talk about what they're feeling. And that's why the reflection time at night is so important. Encourage campers to support one another. And I've got another resource for you, which I call Name It, right? Which is a way of calling out the support when you see it. Like, hey, Timmy, that was great the way you, talked to, David about how he was upset. That's what we call friendship, or that's what we call support, right? So you've got to really encourage your staff and train your staff to call out when they see campers supporting each other. Have that reflection time at the end of the day. And I think you also have to tell kids, look, it's not always going to be this way. I'm going to tell you one of the things that's going to happen, right? Well, let me just go back for a second. When you get to the end of a session, what you're going to see is a rise in anxiety level on the part of your kids, maybe 2 or 3 days before they go home. And that's because, we're going back to, lockdown. We're going back to, where we came from, what was sad for us, or that was hard for us, or that wasn't as connected. And you want to be giving your kids and your staff multiple opportunities to celebrate the opportunity they have. That can be contagious. That sense of celebration, you need to be proactive about it. You need to brainstorm with your staff. How can we celebrate being here? Not just at the end of the session, but even throughout the session. Couple of final words, and I know we're near the end of our time, and I do have a 2 o'clock kid waiting for me. Keep your eye on the overall thrust of what you're trying to do for the campers and the staff, right? You are trying to provide, a golden opportunity. And I know people are nervous about it, but know that we're all going to learn a lot from what you're doing by the end of the summer, right? And a couple of things. I had mentioned to you during the presentation that there's some resources that I'm going to make available. One of them is the grief chart for campers. The classic grief sort of outline is 5 different stages of grief. With kids, it's actually 6. And so I'm going to lay that out because it's helpful for staff to have that as a guide to help name or identify what kids might be experiencing in terms of their feelings. The second is the COVID-19 questions for parents that I mentioned, getting some background information about exactly how the pandemic has affected particular specific campers, how they've handled it. The staff exercise we talked about, the sharing exercise. There's also the Name It character building way to train your staff to call out support or character traits that they see when they see it. And then the staff version of this particular slide deck. All of these I will give in a package by Monday morning to the main summer camps, and they'll distribute it to all of you. So I'm a little out of breath. By the way, I know there are probably things that will come up in the summer that we haven't touched on. And like I said, we're all going to learn from each other. So hopefully we'll get to talk about those things as they come up.
Thank you, Bob, once again for, I just was feverishly taking notes. We've learned so much from you, and this is going to be an amazing guideline for us. We're getting also thank yous coming in the Q&A. We don't have time now for any questions. I know Bob needs to move on in his day, but you have provided us with some amazing resources and help. We're so grateful as always. Thank you, Bob.
Well, great. Yeah, I'm really glad to do it.
Thanks, Bob.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.